As we've seen around the coastline of the UK, different coastlines can have different shapes, and that's because of erosion from the sea, but also because of weathering. So we're going to have a look at weathering. 3 pictures on the board there, which are showing us different landscapes, all looking very different because they've been affected by different types of weathering. The mountain been affected by snow and ice, the picture in the middle that's been affected by the wind and the sun, and then the picture on the right hand side which has been affected by the rain and water. So all of these different things can impact on our landscapes and create very different looking landforms. So different things take place. We can have the sun heating up rocks, which can cause rocks to expand very slowly and gradually crack. We can have pollution. Obviously, if rain is acidic, it can cause that rock to wear away very gradually. If it is cold, then water can get into cracks and freeze and cause weathering along that process. And plants can also cause weathering to take place. First of all then, we've got what's called freeze-thaw weathering. So in this process, water gets into the cracks in the rock. As you can see on the diagram, there's a rock, it's got a little crack into it. If it rains, that crack is going to get water into it. If it then becomes cold at night, that water is going to freeze, it's going to turn to ice, and ice then expands. When ice expands in a crack in a rock, it's going to push that rock further apart, as can be seen by the red arrows. The next day, if the temperature warms up again, that ice will melt or turn back to water, and again, the following night, if it freezes again, the water will freeze, turn back to ice, and the expansion will continue again. So repeatedly, day after day, ice expanding in a crack in a rock can cause that to become bigger. The second diagram shows that process having taken place, the ice having forced that crack wider and wider apart, and caused a rock to start to break. Eventually, that rock will become loose, and with further freeze-thaw weathering, the rock will break off and fall away. Obviously, this process takes place quickly, depending on the weather conditions. It requires cold nights and warmer days for the ice to thaw and to refreeze. Obviously, it will happen a lot slower if less of that freezing and thawing is taking place. The second type of weathering is chemical weathering. You see this happen a lot, particularly on stones on buildings, or as in this example, maybe in a graveyard. We've got a stone that's been outside in the elements of the rain for many, many, many years. After many, many years, the chemicals that are in the rain will wear away at that stone, will dissolve away at it, and you end up with things like the gravestone on the right hand side. The writing has become less clear and the edge of the stone become more rounded. You'll also notice this on buildings, particularly churches that have been around for hundreds of years. The stone on these churches will have worn down, been out in the weather for hundreds and hundreds of years. Thirdly, we've got biological weathering. Again, a type of weathering that takes place along cliff faces, but also on streets that you may walk along. On the left hand side, we've got a small plant that's grown in a crack in the rock. The roots of that plant are very powerful. As the plant grows, it gets bigger and bigger. The roots get down into the rock and they force that rock apart. Now gradually over time, that plant will create weathering of the ground around it. You may notice it if you walk down the road and you walk past a house where a tree is growing, it's pushed up the pavement as the roots have forced themselves onto the pavement and caused the pavement to become uneven. Or it may have pushed a wall out at the side of a garden. This sort of biological weathering is taking place all the time. Obviously, if we get a plant growing on the side of a cliff, that's going to cause the cliff and the rock to break up through this process. The final process is one known as onion skin weathering. This process happens because materials expand when they get hot and they contract when they get cooler. So on a very hot day, the sun's out, the sun's energy is beating down onto a rock. That rock starts to expand, as can be seen by the red arrows. In the evening, the sun goes down, it becomes cooler. It may be somewhere like a desert that is very cold at night. As that takes place, the rock then contracts, as can be seen by the blue arrows. That process is repeated day and night, with the rock expanding and contracting. As this process takes place, what then starts to happen is pieces of rock start to flake off the surface, a bit like the skin of an onion, which is made up of many, many different layers. As the process repeats itself, more pieces will break off and flake away, hence the name onion skin weathering.